You're listening to the Karmic Mirror podcast, where we explore the wisdom tucked within the layers of the self-help world.
Together, we bridge the gap between esoteric teachings and practical tools for everyday life, with self-love and personal growth at the heart of each conversation.
Whether you're a seasoned seeker or just beginning your path, join us and uncover the magic within and around you.
Hello, welcome, Karmic Mirror listeners, to another episode of Karmic Mirror. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, everyone.
Today, we're talking about the cycles of the moon, and this episode is called Moon Talk, Her Phases and Meanings. We'll talk about how the moon impacts us, affects us, how the moon has been honored for centuries. We will dive into the science of the shifting phases. Also, to be noted, by the time this episode airs, we'll be just a few hours shy of the lunar eclipse in Virgo, happening at 2:54 a.m. in Eastern Standard Time on March 14th. Which also adds an extra layer of transformation and release. We'll dive more into that a little bit later in the episode. Before we get into some of our other topics, Michelle, let's dive into and let's highlight, why are we calling the moon her, quote unquote, her?
Yeah. So the episode title, right? Moon Talk, Her Phases and Meanings. And by all means, you do not have to refer to the moon as her. That's just a personal preference. But there is historical context. So the moon has long been a symbol of feminine energy, intuition, cycles. It's so deeply embedded in many, many cultures and traditions around the world. So a lot of times you'll find historical connections between the phases of the moon and the rhythms of life and reproduction of fertility. You can also find associations with the moon with deities like Selene, Artemis, Luna, that really embody those feminine qualities. Also, in Taoist philosophy, the moon aligns with the yin energy. So, yin energy is receptive, it's reflective, it's nurturing. Also, other ancient civilizations, I was looking this up, all of the many, there's so many. There's Egyptian, Mayan, Celtic. There's so many traditions and so many cultures around the world historically that have linked and also many, many indigenous communities that connect their rituals to the moon. So, another thing I like to note is that I always think of women as the first timekeepers. And, I can't go back in time and give you actual evidence, but there is some evidence from ancient cave engravings from like 700,000 BC of notches in cave walls. And a lot of historians believe that this was either a lunar calendar or menstrual cycle tracking, because if you don't know, the menstrual cycle, which can range, but on average, it's about a 28-day cycle, which is the same time as the moon cycle. So 28 days from a new to the waning moon. And so it's really interesting. There's so many connections to women, to femininity, to the moon. And it's something that we didn't mention yet, but today, as of recording, is the first day of Pisces season. So I was thinking to myself about how, by the time this episode airs, we'll have the lunar eclipse in Virgo, and then we have Pisces season on our recording. So how very ally of this episode to have that Piscean and Virgo connection. If you haven't listened to any of our episodes, Allie is a Pisces sun and a Virgo rising.
Rising, yeah.
So I love that connection. But anyways, so again, back to the timekeeping. I like to think that women were the first timekeepers, because what was happening within our bodies naturally over the course of our cycle was being mirrored or reflected back to us with the moon cycle for as long as humans existed. And so as we explore each phase, just maybe notice if any of the themes of reflection, of growth, of release are mirroring your own natural cycles. And you certainly do not have to have a menstrual cycle. This is not a period conversation, though the connections are just so undeniable. But yeah, I think it can apply to anyone. It's just really thinking about your own natural phases, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the science of it.
Yeah. That's so interesting to talk about the timekeeping because a lot of what's been coming up in theme is just that 9 to 5 for me and
Mm.
I hate to say, man-made construct, person-made construct of time.
Oh,
And just interesting to think back and why it would have made sense to keep track of time and absolutely syncing back with those cycles. So that is really interesting. And I know it sounds like you were trying to hit on all of the past
I was like, I don't want
religions and
to
you
leave
don't want to
anyone
leave
out.
anybody out. But what I think is
There's a
fair
lot.
about that, is that it's the theme of the moon plays a large role in a lot of different traditions, religions, cultures. And that again is why we're interested to talk about it. And I know in a lot of my research, there's not necessarily science backed, but spiritually different cultures and religions believing that the moon and its energy is medicine and can help
Yeah.
and heal. And, maybe there are stats and figures or instances that I just didn't come across, but I think you did a beautiful job of
Thanks.
highlighting all. So,
Yeah. But it's something we all have in common, right? Like we're all under the same moon, under the same sun. It's something so, so undeniable for the existence of time, truly.
yeah, it reminds me of what's the movie with Channing Tatum and Amanda, what's her name, where he's like, no matter where I'm at in the world, and they put their thumb over the moon, that they're looking at the same moon.
I have no idea because when you said Channing Tatum, obviously the only thing I could think of was Magic Mike. So, or the dance movies that he was in. So,
Yeah, he was in other movies.
and I
Uh,
think of Zoe Kravitz, of course. Like you're like Channing Tatum, and I'm like, yes, the wonderful woman that he is so
that's
blessed to be with, and vice versa. But um,
That's all when I was thinking about Channing Tatum when it came up the other day when I was listening to a podcast about the moon because they were talking about that.
that's really
Uh,
sweet, though. I
it was a
love that.
very science. I can't remember the name of the movie. It'll come back to me, of course, after we stop recording. But two things I thought I was like, oh, the movie with Channing Tatum. I was like, I don't even. The only reason I like Channing Tatum now is because of his partner.
Well, because she, like Celine, like Artemis,
Mm.
like Luna, is a real goddess on this earth. But to your point about the 9 to 5, and I won't get on my soapbox about this, but if you really think about it, right, like we're returning, the more we talk about moon cycles, the more we talk about menstrual cycles, and we even mentioned this with our Stephanie episode a couple weeks ago, but the more that we return to our own natural cycles of the earth, of our own inner cycles, when we're moving away from, like you said, these man-made constructs, productivity is a very masculine type of energy, and it's great. It's necessary. We need productivity to get shit done. And also we need the balance of that feminine receptive energy to go inward and to rest. And so there's just but again, we've just lived for so long in that paradigm of like the 9 to 5, which is just so counter because, as we'll talk about, there are seasons, there are waves and cycles that we all go through, whether you're menstruating or not, just being alive, being a human, that are so counter to forcing yourself to be one mode of operation of like, we're not robots. So, anyhow,
We're not.
we're not
We're
weird.
not. But yeah, what was funny is that in preparation, I was listening to I found more on the science behind moons. So I know we'll scratch the surface on that right now a little bit, but yeah, for me, I've never been a big science person. So
Me
I don't know if that's
either.
very like 3-5 of me, but the way it becomes applicable, right? So when we talk about science, and I'll pass the ball to you in a minute, the way that the moon and its energy starts to become applicable to me is by conversations and by seeing real life things, right? In our sound healing episode with Tess, when she talked about sound healing and the energy of that, and knowing that human bodies are made up of 55 to 78% of water. Well, what impacts the tides? The moon and the energy. So if the moon's energy, and we know that by science, impacts the tides of our oceans, why wouldn't the moon's energy impact us as human beings? And so that's steering a little bit off of the science side. What did you learn from a science side about the moon that you feel called to share?
Well, I'll just give the basics because, like you, I was not the science kid. Like, give me, a Shakespeare studies class or anything that wasn't science or math. It's no surprise. But anyhow, so what's happening with the moon? So we're going to talk like from a science, like you said, we're going to talk about the meanings, and we've already touched on the historical context a little bit of the moon. But the moon is orbiting around the Earth, and as it orbits the Earth, it creates this changing light. We're viewing the moon from the same side, but what we see as phases is really the change in light from the moon as it orbits the Earth. And so it takes the same time, same amount of time to spin once as it does to orbit the Earth. So we're only seeing one side of the moon. Does that make sense? Like it's
Hmm.
orbiting and it's also moving around the Earth. So we're only seeing one side, and the other is hidden from our view. And this is known as a term called tidal locking. So we talked about water and the tides. And again, I had to like really dig into like what does tidal locking mean? Because I hadn't heard that term. I understood the
Yeah.
tides, and I have heard that many times, but I'd never actually heard the term tidal locking. But basically, the sun's light and the Earth's shadow, they illuminate the moon's surface. And so it's reflecting the sun's light. And as it's orbiting around the Earth, the angles are changing and it's creating different phases, which we're going to talk about. And so we mentioned the lunar eclipse because by the time this episode airs, we'll have the lunar eclipse in Virgo. That is a full moon. When it's a lunar eclipse, that means it's a full moon. And so what happens is the Earth's shadow is blocking the moon's light, and it's causing the moon to appear to us as being dark or sometimes red. And so I always think of the wording of like the moon's being eclipsed, or when we say like something is being eclipsed, it means like we're taking the light. And so we talked about this before, I think in our lunar eclipse episode that we did, and we did a solar eclipse episode a few back if you want to look into that, but we'll definitely link both. But think about ancient civilizations when the moon was being eclipsed, it was like this ominous time because the sky was dark. This was their only source of light. So it's really interesting. So the way that the moon affects the earth when we talk about tidal locking, there's three kind of buckets I think we can talk about is tides. And so you mentioned water and the test episode, which is so fascinating, right? Because there's that connection between the fact that our bodies are made of mostly water and then the tides are being affected by the gravitational pull of the moon. That's what causes the ocean tides. And so high and low tides are stronger during full moons and new moons just due to the alignment of the sun, the earth, and the moon. That's all I'll say on that because I'm not a scientist. But um,
Yeah.
no, anything to
I
add?
was well, not on the tides, because I know we'll talk more, but as I was giggling to myself, the information that I knew maybe that I was hearing is maybe fun facts. I didn't know how applicable it was, but I was going down the rabbit hole of
Yeah.
there's someone who is coming up with some sort of device for people who are on the moon to get all of the moon particles and dust off of their clothes so that they don't inhale it. And
Whoa, that's
I was,
wacky.
yeah, and I was thinking to myself, you're a little too far down the rabbit hole
Yeah,
right
that's
now.
deep.
Why? It got real deep on the science end of things.
Oh my
So
God, that's
I know
funny.
some things, but I think the way you explained it is really helpful, that we'll just see one side of it. So then I know we were talking about, or we had listed circadian rhythms also
Yes,
to
circadian
talk about
rhythms.
circadian. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other bucket, right? So there's the tides, there's our circadian rhythm, so that's our body's natural rhythm. We all have a circadian rhythm. Women, because we have our cycles, we have a second rhythm. It's called the infradian rhythm, which we won't talk about today. But the circadian rhythm can be affected by the moon's cycles or our sleep patterns, and especially. I guess throughout history, cultures that have used the moon or tracked the moon's phases for farming or even spiritual practices and rituals. And so that brings us to the next point, or the next little bucket here, is human energy. So there's research on the moon's impact on human emotions and behavior. And this is ongoing research, but a lot of studies suggest that there is a correlation between the full moon and changes in our sleep patterns, our mood, and also, there's studies on the full moon's impact on crime rates, which is just so wild and bizarre, but it makes a lot of sense. I know I've voice noted you 1,000 times during full moons over the last couple years, where I've been like, my head is so intense. Sometimes I feel
Mhm.
like headaches around the full moon. Sometimes most of the time, I sleep with an eye mask on most nights, but especially during the full moon. I know you've been to my house, but in my room, I have like little windows behind my bed. And so when it's a full moon, there is no dark, like weird, and there's small windows. So I don't even have them
Mm.
covered. I like the light coming in. I love the morning light coming through the windows. But on full moons, my room is literally lit up. So it's hard to fall asleep because even with your eyes closed, it's light. It's like having a light bulb on behind your head.
Mhm.
And so I know for me, I totally can resonate with that feeling of like full moon going stir crazy. Or I had put in our notes, like when we say things like the moon's making me crazy or whatever it is, like this is real. There's actual scientific evidence that's really, it's mixed, but there is scientific evidence about people reporting things like feeling more energetic or more emotional, more restless during these phases of the moon. I also think about how wolves howl at the moon. I don't even think
Mm.
that there's real, um, and again, I'm not a person that needs scientific evidence to prove something to be real to me. But it is fascinating that there's no real, I don't think people can really pinpoint why wolves howl at the moon.
Mhm.
It's just something that they do. And so there's all
Yeah.
kinds of wild things. I mean, think about like werewolf movies.
I know. And thinking about just thinking about, and we'll get into it, full moons, really letting go of what no longer serves you, right?
Yeah.
And the werewolf story,
Oh,
right? Which is a
yeah.
little bit of a darker tone, but it's the full moon brings out this transformation of this werewolf. Now, if you're Michael J. Fox in his high school movie, that makes you a stud and it makes you the most popular person in school. But it just is so interesting how the moon is again that focal that focal point of that transition, which is really interesting. And definitely people talk about animals. That's what I remember from being
Yeah.
young is like, oh, the animals are acting up. It's a full moon. And I don't know. I didn't ever recognize that, but that was kind of my earliest memory of thinking about the moon and its energy. And then, of course, well, I'm wondering the circadian rhythm,
Hmm.
is that, are we talking about needing to change that due to the light of the moon or the energy of the moon, or is that more light as opposed to cosmic energy? Do we
I would
know?
guess maybe it's both, but there's nothing to really change about our circadian rhythm. I mean, other than becoming more energetically or physically aligned with our real circadian rhythms. And I think the most basic terms of that would be like, you know, modern day things that pull us away from our being in sync with our circadian rhythm are things like your blue light from your cell
That's what I was
phone.
thinking about. I
Yeah,
was
we always
thinking
think
about
about
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
yeah, rising with, think about cyclical seasonal living, in the wintertime it's getting darker earlier. And so it's a time to, get more sleep. We are not necessarily going into hibernation, but we do need to sleep a little bit more during these winter months. It's so cold. It's like, but aside from that, it gets darker earlier and it gets, lighter earlier in the morning. So it's just kind of adapting to those natural cycles versus forcing ourselves to operate on a rhythm that doesn't align with our inner cycles.
Mhm. I know you and I really, I don't remember what the moon was, the last one where we were voice noting, and we were having headaches around the same
Yeah.
time of that
Ugh.
moon as well. I get very, in my sinuses and my third eye is a lot of times where I get a lot of pressure. And
Hmm.
that was interesting because I just always chalk it up to my first inclination is cold or I'm dry or something physical. And then when you had brought that up, it made me question. I said, oh, maybe that was not from the physical body. Maybe that was from energetics and added
Yeah.
energy, right?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
the physical body as well.
Totally. Or yeah, or all of the above, right? Like it's really fascinating, but I the headache thing is so wacky, or just feeling that tightness in your head is just so, and it's not every full moon. That would be cause for concern because that'd
Hmm.
be once a month.
Hmm.
But it is interesting. And maybe, later on, I think we're going to talk a little bit about, tie in a little bit of astrology conversation because why not? But I do think that there's an aspect of that, some moons are going to impact you a little bit differently than others based on where it lands in your chart astrologically. But if we're just talking about the phases of the moon, um, I think in our notes we listed out four main phases, but there
Yeah.
are more, as you're going through the moon phases. And I love on my phone, I have that lunar tracking app, which I love. It's like a little widget on your phone, so it tells you where the moon is because the moon does move through, and we're not going to, now I'm like astrology, but the moon moves through different signs every 2.5 days. So there's that layer too. That's just so
Hmm.
intriguing to me. But talking about the moon phases, so let's just start from the beginning of the moon phases. So I mentioned that the moon is on a 28-day cycle, and that's the 28 days it takes to orbit the Earth and the different phases that we see from our view here on Earth. And so in the beginning, in the beginning, there was the Word.
I know, and
So
I was thinking the other thing that I know, Michelle, now is that with this two of the phases, the waxing and waning, there are sub phases within there. And
yes,
as I was listening, we don't need to know that.
that's
I can't
exactly
even
it.
remember all four of the phases right now. So let's just hit our audience with the four. The new moon, is that a
Tell
great
me
place
about
to
it.
start?
Yeah. No, I had like originally in this outline, I had the sub phases, and I was like, this is too deep. Let's just stick with like the
Yeah.
four most known phases and the most relevant because I think it's important to talk about the moon phases, and we're going to touch on, what's happening, what it might mean energetically, and what are some things that you can do to align yourself with the moons to talk about, aligning with your inner and outer season. So the
Yeah.
new moon is essentially, it's a time for surprise, new beginnings and intentions. If you were to just associate it with those two terms, new beginnings and intentions, that gives you so much information. So the new moon, think of it, it's the start of a new lunar cycle. And so, energetically, it's this time of inward focus and self reflection. And we say intentions because you're planting the seeds for what's to come. And I always love the word intention. It's something I intend to do. So when I think of it in terms of what I'm doing over the course of a moon cycle, if I want to look at it in that way, I'm setting intentions for what I want to cultivate over the course of this month or this 28 days. And so you can think about it as goals, but really you're setting the seeds of your intention. And what's happening in the sky is that the moon is positioned between the earth and the sun. So it looks invisible to us. It's there, it just looks invisible. And so, anything to add to that before we talk about a little bit of practices?
No.
Okay. It's all good. It's good. It's good.
Before you started on that, I was thinking about why we wanted to do this episode on moon, and it is very interwoven into your practices and your worlds. And so
Totally.
we talk about it. And throughout maybe the last 6 months, I don't know if you recall, but there have been so many messages coming to me about learn about the moon, learn about the
Mm,
moon. And so here I am learning about the moon. I don't pretend to be an
yeah.
expert right now. We were just talking about earlier where I said, I know there's new moons, I know there's full moons, but it still hasn't stuck with me. Which one
Yeah.
is about letting go? Which one's about intention setting? So I am right on board and I've got the new
Love
moon.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and honestly, I just the moon phases just have always really resonated. And when I got really, really into my menstrual cycle and learning about it, the overlap and the connection between the two are so beautiful. It made me
Yeah.
feel it made me feel really even more grateful to be born into this body of a woman and everyone,
Yeah.
but it just made me really honor all of what goes on within and the ways it's just such a beautiful connection. So
It really is. And we'll talk about the menstrual cycle. I want to talk about that when we finish the
totally.
phases, because that's another area by way of you, by way of
Yeah.
other others in my community has been popping up a lot. And so I love that connection
And
as
it's
well.
so cool. You can also
Hmm.
draw the parallel to, like we said, we're setting intentions on the new moon. You maybe are setting goals for the month, right? Like I always think about there's so many different um little like lines you can draw from just the phases of the moon. So if you're thinking about starting a new month, right, of maybe you have goals, something that you're trying to accomplish over the course of 30 days, and it doesn't have to be lofty goals, but this is, such a cool way to align yourself with them and use the energetics of the moon or outer seasons to help you realize those goals or intentions. So
Hmm.
the new moon, you're setting intentions, you're going inward, right? If you think about it from a literal standpoint, if the new moon looks like it's totally like you see the emoji, it's a black moon because it looks like the moon's hidden. So
Hmm.
naturally, you think, I want to turn inward. I want to go within. I want to reflect. And now I want to understand what am I trying to, what do I want to happen? What do I want to come to fruition over the course of the next 28 days? So thinking about practices like journaling, surprise,
Hmm.
visualizing your goals, intention setting, grounding. So just honoring the stillness, honoring that moment of reflection, and talk about 9 to 5 and productivity and all of those things. We don't culturally, modern day, anyways, we don't make a lot of time. Now you hear a lot about it more now, but I just don't think that we're a culture that really honors rest and stillness. We want to be
Hmm.
going and doing all the time, but in order to do that, it's like the saying, go slow to go fast. We
Yeah.
need that monthly reset to just recharge and recalibrate. So that's what I think about with the new moon. And then the next phase is your waxing phase. So the new moon is waxing
I'm
and it's
always, I could not,
building.
every time I keep here waxing, even in all of these podcasts or reading it, I think about wax on, wax off.
Of
Anytime
course.
I'm so distracted
Yeah.
thinking about the Karate Kid, but I'm like, back to the waxing phase,
But that's
back
kind
to
of
the
like, right, like
waxing
a
phase.
wax on, wax off, right?
Mhm.
So, like, it's
Mhm.
waxing, it's building, it's
It's building
growing.
and growing. Is that how we
Energetically,
remember it?
we're
Yeah.
building momentum and our energy is shifting from inward to outward action. Because if you think about that new moon, you're setting intentions. What do I hope to accomplish? Then that next phase, the waxing, as our energy increases or the full moon builds and grows, so are our actions. Now it's time, right? You set intentions. Now it's time to take action on how you will bring those to fruition. And so you're setting things in motion. And the science is that the moon is starting to move away from the sun. It's becoming visible, and it's that little thin crescent. So it's that emoji where it's like you see a little sliver. It's often that moon picture that we so often see of the crescent moon. So it's growing, and so thinking about how do you, and I love to bring back like this goal setting process because it's just so oddly, again, not trying to make it about productivity, and I'm not even saying goals as in like trying to accomplish a certain thing. Maybe it's something subtle or inward, whatever it is. But if you set intentions on the new moon and you're now the waxing moon, you're starting to take action, then practices might look like having a plan. How do I actually want to make this happen? Or making commitments. You're starting to deepen into, root into those intentions and start to take those little measurable steps. That makes sense so far?
Hmm.
Okay. So then we come to the full moon, right? 2 weeks later. The full moon. This is the illumination and release. And so you mentioned releasing, shedding. Like, when do I release? When do I shed? When do I, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the full moon is always, whether it's, astrological conversations or just otherwise, the full moon is like the moon is illuminated. So it's positioned between the sun. I'm sorry, the earth is positioned between the sun and the moon. And so it's illuminated fully. And that is when the moon's energy is most potent. It's like right there, right? This is what I talked about. Like my bedroom is lit up by the moon. There's so much light in the sky. And so this is like the peak culmination of the moon cycle. And I always think about this from an energetic standpoint. We say releasing or shedding because everything is coming to light. If I am taking action on those intentions that I set and I'm moving and making momentum and motion towards my end result, whatever that may be, then the moon is illuminating to me energetically all of the things that I need to release or shed in order to continue to move forward to completion.
Mhm.
That's what I look at it, right? Like if the moon is bright, it's like, okay, where am I shedding light on all of the things that aren't necessarily supporting what your intention is?
I'd be remiss if I didn't say what's popping up for me is
Yeah.
that I probably should have said this before we got into this, but nonetheless, here we are. Reflectors. What is coming up for me here
Mm.
is the advice for reflectors in human design is to put water outside
Oh,
every
yeah.
night because reflectors in human design make their decisions based on the lunar cycle. So as you're talking, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just thinking about how that could play out in a reflector's decision-making process might be very helpful for them, right? I
Yeah.
just think of that because we had talked about how the young reflector I knew, we used to call it moon juice, and they would drink the moon juice to help get that energy in them. So that's very human design spiritual. But as you're explaining all of these phases of the moon, I can't help but think about our reflectors out there, even though they're like 1% of the population or less, how helpful
Yeah.
just your verbiage around this might be for them to understand their process. And of course it's great for everybody, right? And we don't want to make it productive and goal setting and but
Yeah.
but what's popping up for me is it's just another modality, another way to be on your journey. And connecting it with the energy of the moon is a beautiful thing. All right, back to the
Totally.
full moon, and we were talking about
Yeah.
practices maybe, but I think you were
Yeah.
pleased to bring up the reflectors point.
100%. Yeah, reflectors in human design is so fascinating to me,
Mhm.
and it's such a interesting concept that their decision-making process is a lunar cycle, and it's so cool because you get to it's like an extended version of like the emotional wave of like going through the motions, feeling out the highs and lows so that you can get to a really clear decision. Whereas the reflectors go through this whole 28-day cycle, and maybe it's not 28 days, but it is really fascinating to really feel out every aspect of what is coming up, of what they're being influenced in, all of the things in order to really know what feels right for them. And that is
Mhm.
just, it's so cool. So, full moon practices, you can dance naked under the moon. I'm just kidding. I've never done that. But it is, but you can.
In or in To Be Magnetic, there is a deep imagining around the full moon where you're meant to go
Cool.
out in the full moon energy and do that meditation to soak in the full
Okay,
moon.
I
So,
love that. And
mhm,
yeah, I do, depending on the moon, right? Like if it's a moon, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, but, depending on what sign the moon lands in, I may or may not resonate or want to do something more or less. Some full moons come and go, and I do
mhm,
nothing, right? But you can do things like, doing a ritual to release what's not serving you in this particular cycle. So, I'll reference like the Channing Nicholas app right, Channing Nicholas. Anyways, or other, astrologers or esoteric, practitioners and
well, Chris
such.
Corsini, that's what we were talking about before we jumped on here. I was like, girl, all I know is I follow. So, Chris Corsini
Mm,
typically will do a new moon and a full
yeah,
moon workshop. And I tend to do all of those. So that's when I was saying to you, I was like, girl, I don't know the difference, but now that you're talking through it, there really is the practice within those of either calling in or letting go, which
totally.
is relevant.
Yeah.
But for me, I just had someone that I could trust. Just tell me when the cycles are and I'll do it.
Yeah. Well, and also most people, I would say the most common ritual that you will hear about in just modern day times is to kind of write out what are the things that you're releasing, and maybe a lot of people will say burn them, right? We just had a full moon in Leo, so Leo's a fire sign. So So, like using that energy to just burn through what you're releasing. And
Yeah.
that could be numerous things. It could be physical aspects, it could be habits, it could just be energy, it could be whatever that is. But there's something so symbolic about the fire, just burning through, like helping,
Yeah.
add that other layer of energy to your ritual.
I'm
And
giggling a little
so,
bit. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just giggling a little bit because the last full moon, as we talked about astrologically, sometimes I can get fear of I'm going to miss out on this energy if I don't do things. And so the last full moon, I think, was in Leo, and
Yeah.
this is going to be a great one, a powerful one. So I didn't want to miss it. And I'm giggling because I did the burning ritual.
Yeah.
I'm on the second floor of my apartment
Oh
complex.
God.
And when I first moved in, I was one of the reasons why I really felt called to this place is my friend and neighbor downstairs. She has Tibetan prayer flags on her porch. I saw crystals in her window. So we're like very aligned. I think about this story. If it had been anyone else, they would have been like, yo, this woman is insane. Because just so happened I like walk out to do my burning when she
Hmm.
was walking out to take the garbage out. I'm just kind of like, don't mind me, just burning my full moon, what I'm
Yeah.
letting go of. And I like put it in a jar, but it was so windy that it blew
Oh
the
my
fire
God.
out and it was on my porch. So I was literally having to stomp it out. And then later I found pieces, they were stuck to the bottom of my slippers of like
So
pieces
funny.
of what I was letting go. And I could not stop laughing. And I kept telling my friends, I'm like, there's something about this. The universe is like, let it linger, let it go. We're really going to make you want to let all of these go. So that's what I was thinking about and giggling about. And as you know, people are looking, what is that woman stomping out a fire
Yeah.
on her
I
deck?
thought you were going to say that your fire alarm went off, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's
Well,
normal.
could you imagine? Yeah, you're like, that would be where Allie's life goes. I'm surprised that something didn't catch fire just for a story to tell that. But anyways, so
Yeah.
I would recommend if you're burning things, put your finger up, lick it, get the wind.
Yeah. Do it safely. Don't do
No
it. Yeah.
fire hazards.
Be
Okay.
safe.
Mm,
Something else you can do to kind of acknowledge the full moon or as a ritual is just simply celebrate your small wins or celebrate where you are in that moment. I think that's also another flip side, right? We talk about full moons so much of like, you must release and shed. And it's not always this like ominous dark things, right? Sometimes it's simply just acknowledging. And I think about it this way too. If the full moon is at like midway point of the moon's cycle, where it's at its zenith, it's at its peak of fullness, it's also like the midpoint of whatever it is you are doing over the course of this cycle. And so it's a great time. Like what happens when you're at the midpoint of, let's say, a race, right? Or a marathon. I won't say a race because, this is a set time frame, but you want to acknowledge like, okay, keep going, like
mm,
look at how far you've come, and also maybe you can put this down and you can keep going, like release offload some weight and like keep going and cheer yourself on. I think that's another way to look at it. And so the last phase we'll talk about is the waning phase. So now it's past the full moon and we're waning and we're going towards that new moon phase. So, this is a time for reflection and closure. So, as the moon's light begins to wane, we are now shifting back into that time of reflection, of continuing to reassess what we've done. So, looking at reflecting on that past cycle, what have we accomplished? Where do we still have room to go? Or what, just reassessing. And and on literal terms, it's or if we talked about farming a little bit, we touched on, I mentioned it anyways. This is the harvest of the fruits of our efforts, right? So just purely on farming terms, which I have
mhm.
never farmed, but you plant the seeds in the new moon. You cultivate and you sow the seeds by trying that new approach, right? You're going towards the waxing moon and you're building momentum and action and motion. The full moon, you're like, okay, where am I at? Let's recalibrate, release, or shed and acknowledge where we are so that we can continue to move into that waning phase of closing out this cycle, reflecting on how it went. So there's this constant connection. I think that's like the big takeaway for the moon is like you're constantly checking in with where you are on your inner cycles, what's happening out externally, and just recalibrating. And for me, the moon phases is just the most beautiful, beautiful reminder that we are always, life is so cyclical. Like we always think we need, like we have some endpoint, but the truth is we are constantly cycling through phases and seasons and waves all throughout our life. And I always think about the moon cycles as like we're always beginning again. So when we think that, like, oh no, we totally effed up, life is so hard, blah, 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 all the things, we're like, oh wait. And also, we get this beautiful reset that reminds us that we can always start fresh. We're building, and just as the moon is building on its phases, we're never really starting over from nothing. We're always building, and we can always hit that reset button. We can always begin anew. And it's like nature's beautiful, beautiful way to remind us to just have so much grace for ourselves in this whole process. Like there's always, it's so cyclical, and it's such a lovely sentiment, but it's so real and so applicable to our lives. So
Well,
do we say like any rituals or practices for the waning?
I don't know that. Oh, have we talked about that?
Yeah, I think there's no necessarily like real like hard way, and we're just saying suggestions for
Mhm.
practices like journaling, setting in but with the waning moon, just like any closing out of any cycle, it's like practice gratitude. That's so beautiful. If you aligned with the phases of the moon and not in some disciplined hardcore way, but if at the end of every moon cycle you were like, let me just reflect on like what am I grateful for? What have I learned? Like acknowledging and what an incredible way to live just such a in tune life to just say like I'm taking this time to reflect on this past cycle and with just such gratitude and understanding for everything I've come through over the past whatever 28 days.
Yeah. What came to me when you were talking about the waning phase, if the waning phase was a song, might it be Taylor Swift's Begin Again? When you were talking, do you know
Girl,
that
you know I
song?
don't know that song.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I
I'm sorry.
forget. Wait, hold on. No, just totally kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't know it? Hold on. But it's all about it, it's literally called Begin Again, and it's
Yeah.
in a different context, but that's how I'll remember it. Some of the words were very
Yes.
reminiscent of the lyrics. It's beginning again, so that
Right? This is
sticks
the
with me.
three line coming through, right? Your love for Taylor
Mhm.
Swift and the three line of like, you've got to live it. And now it's going to resonate deeper with you, which is just so timely. So, those are the four main phases of the moon. And I hope it kind of highlights the
Mhm.
progression of its phases, what it might mean energetically, and how you can just start to a little by little, again, like it doesn't need to be disciplined. Like that's the whole antithesis of the moon being receptive and in that yin feminine energy isn't about trying to force yourself into it's actually just trying to like rest into these natural cycles so
Mhm.
that you can just be in this like state of like flowing with versus against the currents of life.
Yeah. I think that's a great transition into talking about our natural cycles, aka
Yeah.
women's menstrual cycles. Now, this is admittedly something that you really brought to my focus about how our cycles emulate the cycles of the moon. I don't know if that's the best word for it, because I hate using the word like syncing because
Mm,
it that confuses me in my brain.
yeah.
I may just be biased of, and this is where we kind of got earlier, where the new moon doesn't mean everybody is at the same spot of their cycle at that new moon, but
Yeah.
and maybe you have a better word than emulating there. And this has been something that has just started to really come up in my community as well. I'm in this Health Healers program, as I was telling you the other day. And when we were all introducing ourselves, we were all highlighting where we were at in our cycles, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm very much someone who I'm like, I don't know, I get my period on this day. What phase am I in?
Hmm.
Can I get a subject matter expert here? However, you do a really beautiful job of talking through that. Might you draw the comparison between the two and use your words maybe more articulately than
Yeah.
I just did talking about it.
Well, here's the cool thing is, right? Like when we talk about women's menstrual cycles and how they maybe connect to or mirror the cycles of the moon, one, to your point, like subject matter expert, I'm so steadfast in this point that like you are the expert. It's just a matter of like um tuning in, right? Like paying attention, and not to say that you aren't, but like truly, right? Like that's the thing is, and it's not, and I'm not saying this to you, it's just that because of the way that we have traditionally viewed menstrual cycles, and again, like how grateful am I to be at a to be alive in a time where we talk about this so naturally as a beautiful occurrence and in this like really I don't know, this point of like beautiful power to be a woman and to have this like such this like monthly evolution of things that occur from brain chemistry to our body to our hormones, all of these things that are constantly changing. And just again, like the moon reminding us that we're not stagnant and that when we start to trust what's happening within our body, we start to trust ourselves more and we start to trust that we truly are the experts of what's happening within and that we lean less and less on the external structures in place. And so the connection between the moon phases and your menstrual cycle is so cool to me. That's how I started to learn about both and how I started to make the connection. And oddly enough, right, like coaching is so much about forward momentum and taking action in our lives to co-create. And so all of those things weirdly tie together. It's so cool because we have this like unique rhythm that just like is our own, it's our own clock, right? It's an
Hmm.
infradian rhythm for women. Um and so if you I should preface the conversation or preface this with the fact that in no way, shape, or form does your menstrual cycle need to line up with the phases of the moon. That is so just you bleed when you bleed, right? Like it's
Yeah.
totally personal.
Don't change your birth control dates around the
Don't
moon.
change anything,
Yeah,
right?
don't change
Like
anything.
just tune into what is happening within you, and that's so right. But symbolically alone, we can associate the new moon with the phase of your cycle that is your period. So your bleed. And the reason why is, right, we talked about new moons are a new beginning. It's the beginning of a new cycle. And it's also a time to turn inward and for reflection. And your your period is exactly that time. It's the start of a new menstrual cycle. And it's the time, right? We're when you're bleeding, what do you have? Like, what is there? Again, we have to live life. We live in a world. We don't exist alone and in a vacuum. But this is a time your body is doing this heavy lifting of shedding its uterine lining. And so, what better thing to do than to turn inward and to rest and reflect? And so, thinking about using that time where you're already like, I'm like a little bit lower energy because chemically in our brain and our hormones, we do have lower energy. Our body is doing a lot of work internally, physically. Our brain chemistry when you're on your period, it's like um we have our left and right brain, a left and right side of our brains when you're on your period are more closely linked. And so it's interesting. It's like this time of the month where literally you give no books. Um, because you're on your period. And that's what happens. It's like, for me, anyways, I always feel like I'm so much more uncensored when I'm in that phase because I'm like, I don't care. I'll say whatever I want. But this is what's happening in our brain. So it's an interesting time to use that to really, really reflect. If I'm going to get real about setting intentions for the next cycle, or if I'm going to get real about how I want to do self reflection, I want to do it at a time where my left and right brain are talking to each other clearer than they are all month chemically. So it's cool because everything starts to line up. So you're in your new moon phase again. You don't have to bleed at this time. We're just saying symbolically it's a time. So when you're on your period, then the next phase of your menstrual cycle is the follicular phase. This is that week right after your period. And if you associate it with the waxing phase of building and building momentum, what happens when your period is over? I don't know about you, but I get this freaking wild burst of energy where I'm like, yep, let's go. I'm ready. I'm like out and I'm like ready to do things differently. Energetically, when you're in your follicular phase, your brain is more open. I'm sorry, I said energetically, but also brain chemistry wise, your brain is more
Mhm,
open to new experiences.
mhm,
We are seeking something different. And so if you're looking at it in the context of the waxing phase, you're trying a new approach to the intentions that you set in your new moon phase. You're like trying to do things differently or experiment because we have this new energy and it's also, again, I hate to bring it to this productivity conversation because it's so not the intention here, but thinking about this kind of cycle of like when you start a new role or new something, your dedication and your commitment level is like super high. You have high energy, but you have very little skill level. I'm totally talking like corporate terms, but it's a fascinating link there because you're like, okay, like let's just experiment and try something different in that phase to
mhm,
build momentum and excitement towards your whatever you're doing that month. And then the next phase is ovulation. So that short 5 day, 3 to 5 day window where you may or may not be ovulating, but this is the phase of the cycle that you're in. I think about it, again, to link it to the moon, that's like your full moon. And the easiest way I can describe it or how it sticks in my mind is biologically, when you're ovulating, right, your body is maybe or maybe not, depending on your own body is traditionally it's releasing an egg, right? You're ovulating and you're trying to make a baby on very, simplest terms, whether you are or not, right? Like not everybody's trying to have a baby, but this is your ovulation phase. And so what happens? Brain chemistry energetically during ovulation, you are more sociable. You want to be around people more. So think about the full moon. You're like bright, you're illuminated, and you're like, here I am. Look at me. I want to be seen. I want to do it and I want to make a baby biologically, whether I want to or not, right? Like you may want to be around your girlfriends more. You want to socialize in this particular phase of your menstrual cycle. And then your luteal phase is that last phase of your menstrual cycle. It's that 10 to 14 day window before your next bleed. And so, if you think about it in moon terms, the waning phase of reflection and closure, what's happening in your body during the luteal phase and what's happening in your brain is that we become more detail oriented, we're more task focused. And it's almost like you're closing out this cycle by tacking off everything on your to-do list and getting things done at the end of the cycle so that you can continue to flow with that energy that's turning inward to prepare for your next period. That's how I link them. And the more you like get into it, you're like, it clicks, it makes sense. It doesn't matter when your period falls. That's
mhm.
like, for you and you to alone. But just thinking symbolically, the connection between the two. It's so undeniable and it makes total logical sense to me because every cycle, right? It's like a month. It's a month cycle. So was that enough on the menstrual and the moon? I
Yeah, I
don't want to
think
go too deep.
yeah, I think it's good. I think it's good to get interested in it. I think something like that feels like we could dedicate a whole
That's exactly
episode to that. So I think it's good to paint the picture and we'll talk about that more. We'll dive into that in a later episode. I'm
for
almost
sure.
certain, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Oh, and you know what? A few years ago, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago now, I made a guide on your cycle, which we'll link in the show notes. You can
I think
download it
about
for
that.
free
Yeah.
because there's a page in that guide that I created. So, I mean, I have to go back and revisit it, but honestly, it's still relevant um, because I did make a page that literally outlines this exact cycle of the moon with your phases. So we'll put that in the show notes. So if you're really interested and you want it, I've got it for you for free. It's from a few years ago, but it's totally relevant. It's got like, you know, the food that you should eat on your on depending on which phase you're in, what's happening energetically, also movement. I talk a little bit about movement, the different ways that you can support your menstrual cycle. But anyhow, back to the actual moon and its phases. Let's talk about the lunar eclipse happening because I think we've really touched on the phases of the moon And there's so much beautiful content out there that highlights and talks about this in different terms, but it's all really similar, right? Like there's moon journals, there's so many cool people out there doing amazing things to help us align with these beautiful natural rhythms. And so the lunar eclipse, we brought this up because it's timely, because it's going to happen the day after, or really like hours after this episode airs. But we do have a lunar eclipse in Virgo on March 14th. And the lunar eclipse is when we have a full moon and the Earth's shadow is blocking the moon and it's temporarily cutting off its light. And you can also maybe look at it as a cosmic reset button. But because I think I mentioned earlier about how in ancient times when where there were eclipses, the moon was being blocked. So like the
Mhm.
light was out. The only source of light was out of natural light.
It's
And
also what we hear.
yeah.
I mean, it's just another thing astrologically where people,
Hmm.
oh, it's eclipse season again. So that's where I
That's
hear
exactly.
eclipse most of the time.
Yeah, because the eclipses will come in a season. So, for example, this lunar eclipse that we have on March 14th is the second of two eclipses that will happen. So, the new moon eclipse happens 2 weeks before this episode airs, and that's called a solar eclipse when we have an eclipse on a new moon. And then on a full moon, we have a lunar eclipse. So, we call it a season because we're in between eclipses. And I know we mentioned this in that episode, but there's always some like little kind of overarching themes with eclipse season. Like one big theme astrologically is don't manifest during eclipse season. When our source of light is being blocked out, or when we have this, so to speak, cosmic reset, like this is not your time to be trying to manifest the things. It's, you know, it's a time again, like go into that space of reflection and understanding what's happening, what's shifting. Maybe you're doing some release or whatever because it's a full moon, but it's just not a time to be trying to like really make things like the big manifestations come through. It's a time to just like tune in. What's coming up? What am I seeing? Like all of those things. What else?
Yeah, I what was just racing through my mind is I think I'll be honest. It's like
Yeah.
sometimes with all of these, I feel a little like do the things to get the positive outcome. If you do all of the right
Yeah.
things in the right time, you'll have a positive outcome, right? And I was just thinking back, I can't even remember when it was, but I was doing something. I think I was, oh, I was doing when we're breaking tide cutting, cord
Cord
cutting.
cutting. Okay. Yeah,
Not
yeah.
my brain trying to attach it back to the moon. Uh, and you're like, girl, you are brave to be doing that during this time. I'm like, I didn't even know it was this time. So,
Yeah, well,
like,
because so much it can feel really heightened around those times
yeah.
also. It may or may not, right? It lands differently for everyone, for many different reasons. But again, like I think of the moon, I think of astrology and how these tuning into whether it's the lessons or the wisdom within either, it's totally meant to I think, anyways, having this understanding is meant to empower you in your own free will to make decisions for you. So when we have this like fear or of missing out or fear of not getting the good outcome, it's like
Mm,
this is the more you tune into the moon, the more you tune into
yeah.
these things, it's like, no, it's totally meant to allow you to relax into the fact that it's going to come again. Yes, the moon cycles through all signs over the course of a year. So it's only going to be, like, for example, you're going to only have one new moon in Leo and one full moon in Leo in the whole year. So if it's incredibly potent, maybe you want to pay attention to that if Leo lands somewhere prominent in your chart. Although,
Mhm.
we all have every sign in our chart. And
Yeah.
and I'm such a believer that if you're not feeling called to do anything with the moon, then you're not feeling called to
Yeah.
it, regardless of where it lands. Like you're gonna resonate with whatever comes up in that moment. And that's the beauty of the cyclical, like alignment is
Yeah.
that you're like, okay, we're gonna have another new moon in another 4 weeks, or we're gonna have another.
And sometimes just the reality of it is that the moon phases in astrology are not my only modalities that I'm
Right.
working through and like healing and whatever the end goal is. And so, as you know, I try to say, why do I get triggered by that of like you can't
Mm,
manifest? And sometimes, and I think what literally came up to me is like, because sometimes, girl, you don't have any other time. Like, it's nice to be able to follow the energetics, but sometimes life just doesn't sync up with, right?
exactly.
You maybe this is my one time when my kids aren't in school or that I
Hmm.
have a break from work or that I feel mentally clear enough to do it. And don't let my thing become your thing of seeing that it's a lunar eclipse and you want to manifest and it's the only time you have and beating yourself up about it. Again, it's and maybe that's my three line too, is just trial and error and thinking I need to do things right. But anyways, we're getting off a little bit from the
I think it's
lunar
perfectly
eclipse, but
spot on with the conversation of the lunar eclipse happening in Virgo because everything you're saying is so Virgo
like look at you, girl, it's
centric.
already impacting you.
Totally, right? So
Mhm.
when we talk about the signs that are in that the moon is in, right? And here to your point about, like this is the time I want to do a ritual, but I only have this time, right? Well, think about the moon is in every sign for 2.5 days. So you have that little window
Yeah.
before the full moon or the lunar eclipse or whatever it is, and you have that little window after. So there's the energy. It's just that it peaks, right? So if you have one of those lunar apps like I do on my phone, you see, like, for example, right now, the moon is in Scorpio and it is a waning gibbous and it's 68% illuminated, meaning like as it goes, like as it goes towards the new moon, it's going to be little by little. It's just at that full moon, that exact moment that it's at its peak doesn't mean, I mean, if that were the case, then we on the East Coast would need to be up at 2:54 a.m. doing
Mm.
like a full moon ritual or whatever it is, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so we
yeah.
have this window to be able to work with the energy if you so choose, if you're called to it. But I say the Virgo themes are so spot on because what do we associate with Virgo? I think perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
Like detail oriented, being about all of the little things. Like Virgo is that sign.
Yeah,
And so
methodical. Hmm.
yeah. And so, thinking about how you might work with a lunar eclipse, if you're not manifesting, then maybe, which you shouldn't, looking at where does Virgo land for me? And or do I resonate with any of these themes of Virgo that perhaps I'm ready to maybe reflect on how it is or isn't supporting me in this phase of life? And is there anything that I need to release here? And so thinking about Virgo themes, is there anything to do with perfection? Is there any, that maybe I need to reflect deeper on and maybe I can loosen up. Maybe it's not a full blown release, but maybe I can reflect on what are the little ways that I'm able to um, move away from this sense of perfection or needing everything to be aligned perfectly or be so rigid in my routines? Or does everything have to be organized and set in order for me to do the thing? Or can I just show up messy? Can I just be a little bit in my own, in my own humanness? And so thinking about it in those terms, I think is a really helpful starting point because it's so simple. You don't have to do any ritual on March 14th. If all you do is think about to yourself, like, where am I holding on to perfectionism right now? And is there anything I can loosen up a little bit about that? Or maybe it's just the reflection in itself that is healing, right? Just the acknowledgement. Maybe you don't do anything with it, and that's 100% cool and okay as well.
Hmm. Autumn, I started giggling because well, as you started talking, I think I lost my train of thought. There was something about my cycle, and I was thinking about where I'm at in my cycle today. I can't
Hmm.
make the connection back right now, but then I just started, then my brain went to, okay, where is my cycle going to be on the lunar eclipse on March 14th? So I started giggling because I was like, I wanted to ask you, right? Well, let's say that it's a lunar eclipse, but what if I'm in that phase of my cycle where I'm literally supposed to be, not literally, but supposed to be resting and not doing the things. And then I full circle started giggling because there's my Virgo again, trying to perfect the
Yeah.
thing, trying to like already plan for March 14th
Right,
of
right.
how that is. And it's just so interesting to me how my brain gets so right and wrong. And I think where I'm trying to have more self love in my life is because these things are also natural gifts to me. And there
Hmm.
are also ways of being. So, again, I don't want to shy away because it is very three line of asking questions and
Yeah.
trial and error and how should I do this, because then that gives me something to respond to of, oh, that didn't work, or I did like that, and that's how
Hmm.
three lines work. But even just as you were talking, that whole thing, I was just giggling because it's all the things we're meant to. I love the question you have, what is no longer in alignment with my well-being, that
Yeah.
you had thrown into our notes. And as I'm literally here trying to perfect what I'm going to be doing on
Yeah.
that, right?
Well, it's like a reflection on like what about this level, and I'm using the word perfectionism a lot, but I think it's a blanket statement for all of those type of Virgo qualities. And not to say that every person that, we all have Virgo in our chart somewhere, so there's
Yeah,
always going to be
yeah.
somewhere in our life. And it may or may not be more impactful based on where it lands for you. For you, it's your rising sign. So there are always going to be aspects of Virgo that are so important for you because it's who you are becoming. It's like the evolution of who you are, and those Virgo qualities really support you and serve you well. But to your point, it's like what's no longer in alignment with my well-being? What about this perfectionism is holding me back from just like whatever it is, right? Trusting that I'm where I'm meant to be, that my body is doing what it needs to do, that I'm, like trusting in that.
And I'm
And
also really
yeah.
focusing on my emotional waves too. And so I
Yes.
think that that's where the frustration can come up, as I'm like, how can I do this perfectly? I've got moon cycles, I've
Yeah.
got my cycles, I've got my highs and my lows. And so it's just really, it's that inner work that I continue to do, because
Yeah.
it also is like on that day, I could in my emotional wave be on such a low and
Hmm.
not meant to quote unquote do anything, right?
Yeah. Which would be very aligned because you're not meant to do anything. It's a lunar
Or I
eclipse.
could be on a high,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And
Either
whatever it
or.
is right.
Mm, mm,
And so ways to kind of work with the eclipse that we, want to touch on is Virgo loves body-based rituals, loves the practical. So if you do anything, maybe try grounding. And it could be as simple as grounding as in, well, one, it's going to be freaking cold probably. So don't go out in your bare feet and put your feet in the grass because your grass is probably dead.
mhm.
But, grounding into your body, get your feet on your own floor wherever you are, sit down, maybe do a quick body scan, and when I say body scan, I mean literally just like close your eyes and visualize your toes and move through your body and just come back into yourself. That could be it.
I mean, even just
Um,
walking for me helps. I think about
yeah.
that. I'm on the second floor. So, of course, when I'm thinking about grounding, sometimes I'm like, you are not on the ground, girlfriend. But again,
Mm.
it's all the mental traps that can get.
That's exactly because you're grounding into your body, into your physical
Yeah,
body,
yeah, yeah.
wherever you are. The other practical aspect of Virgo is you can also just use this time to clear your space, clean your closets out, do whatever you're feeling called to, but physically, emotionally, maybe you want to journal out and just get stuff out of your brain and onto the page. And you can also just spend that time in quiet reflection. You can do it in verbal reflection with your friends, whatever the point is whatever is coming up, whatever you're feeling called to, is exactly what you're meant to do.
Yeah. I always
But
have
don't
to
try to
remember
manifest. Just don't
and
manifest.
don't manifest. And I yeah, I just go back to one of my mantras that is just resonates hardcore with me is what's meant for you won't miss you. And I often when
Yes.
I'm in my perfectionism, I try to do that, right? Of
Yeah.
doing the thing or not doing the thing, or doing it perfectly, quote unquote, or not perfectly, is none of your business. You're going to get to where you are, and that's a practice too and a mindset. And so yeah, I'd kind of asked, we were talking a little bit before. For me, I think where I can get a little jumbled with the moons, right, is
Hmm.
that we have these moon cycles that it represents something energetically that ain't right. and maybe not represent, but lend themselves very nicely to certain practices.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a new moon, it's a full moon,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a lunar eclipse.
Oh,
And those will each be in a certain sign, right? And so let's just take the lunar eclipse. Like,
mm-hmm.
if we're interested in just working with the lunar eclipse, what's the best process for doing that? Knowing it's in Virgo, it's in my rising, but what are practical tips when we're
Mm.
how do we work with these energies when it
Well,
comes
we
to
said
astrology?
grounding, clear space, right? Reflection. But I think to your point, right? If I can just backtrack,
Hmm.
we are talking about a couple different themes here.
Yeah.
One, you don't need to know or give a hoot about astrology in order to understand and align with the cycles of the moon. That is one
Yeah.
separate thing entirely. If you are interested in astrology and you want to weave that into your rituals or your practices, or you already do, or you want to have a better understanding, I think it would be easier to talk about, let's say we always have things like, for example, Shane and I have done workshops like new moon in such and such sign or full moon. And you were talking about Chris Corsini's, right? And the
Hmm.
reason why astrologers, um, we work, I'm not an astrologer. Um, the reason why astrologers work with the energetics of a particular moon phase and tie it in what sign it's in is because, when the moon is in a specific sign, like a Virgo or maybe Aries, I'm just talking about you. Aries is your moon sign. Let's just
Hmm.
talk about all yours. But when the moon is in a specific sign, the energy of that sign is what's going to influence the types of intentions or actions that might be relevant for you to focus on. It's also going to influence based on where that sign lands in your personal chart. So if you really
Hmm.
want to make it, more personalized, let's say, we'll backtrack. There was the full moon in Leo that just recently happened. And so there's so many layers to this. So I just want to keep it super high
Yeah.
level because we can talk about the 6 month cycle, but that's another whole story anyways.
Yeah.
But let's say just purely speaking to, okay, we say, oh, there's a full moon happening in Leo. Then we take the themes of the full moon. What do we want to do during the full moon? Things are coming to light. They're being illuminated in our life. We're at that midway point, and we want to release or maybe shed, or we want to acknowledge where we are in that point of that particular cycle.
Hmm.
Leo comes in because if it's a full moon in Leo, then the energy of Leo, right? One, Leo's a fire sign. So maybe we're getting a little spicier and fiery, right? Maybe we feel that heightened energy. But then what are the other aspects of Leo that we associate? It could be leadership, it could be boldness, it could be creative expression. And so we think just high level, okay, we have a full moon in Leo. Maybe I want to reflect on or what's coming to light in the way that I self express, or that I create, or that I lead, or how I make bold decisions, or whatever that looks like for you. Then, if you want to take it a step deeper and you want to look at it where it lands in your chart and make it more personal. So, if that moon falls, an example, your rising sign, or for me, Leo is my sun sign, so I think about my sun sign. That's my essence. It's my core essence of who I am, fiery
Hmm.
Leo. And um, and so what are the things that maybe are um hindering me from my fullest expression of like Leo qualities that I really want to embody or that I want to
Hmm.
highlight? What's holding me back? So I think about a full moon in Leo, right? Like what's being illuminated for me. Leo falls in my seventh house of creative partnerships. I mean, I'm sorry, of one-on-one partnerships and collaborations. And so, um, where am I not, showing up fully in my boldness and taking the lead, or where am I not embodying those Leo-like qualities that feel so core to me and in my relationships? And so I might
Hmm.
reflect there. So it can guide you to a place that is a little bit more specific to you that you might want to reflect on. And then it's up to you what comes up,
Yeah.
right? Like whatever comes up. But the point is, you take whatever the theme is of that moon, what's happening, that that phase of the moon, and you're relating it to what's the energy of that particular zodiac sign. And if that's all you look at, that's great. That's all that matters
Mhm.
because collectively that's what's happening. But if you want to go deeper and you want to look into your chart, then you're just going to look at where does this particular sign, so lunar eclipse happening in Virgo on March 14th, where does Virgo land for you in your chart? Where does Virgo land for me? I know I have my Virgo in Venus, but your Virgo is your rising sign. So, rising, who are you rising? Who are you ascending and becoming? How do you, some people say the first impression. I think some people don't necessarily resonate with that, but I do think it aligns in so many ways.
Eliza Kelly was just talking about the rising,
Yeah, she
and
was saying that the common misconception is that a lot of modern day astrologers will say that it's a mask that you wear to the world, which I had never really heard until she said that. And she said that's a total myth. That is not true. So I think, but I do think that your rising is, as it says in the word rising, or your ascendant, who are you ascending to, or what energy are you ascending towards more?
hmm
And I really resonate with that definition of it. Um,
yeah, I love that I can just say that, and your two line comes out and just repeats exactly what she said. I was like, man, I can't find those words, and but I love that about us. And yeah, look up and please share where you find your Virgo for more examples. I'm just really
yeah.
appreciative that the way you really outlined it was really helpful for me. I mean, thank you for
Yeah.
going there with me. And I think from what it sounds like, yeah, you could just use the moons.
Hmm.
You could, and then you can also look at the sign. Then you could go deeper into where does that sign fall in your natal.
100%.
And then you also can look at the house in which
Yeah.
that falls into to give you insight. And so
There's
we
just
don't have to go down the
layers.
rabbit hole. It's layers,
Yeah,
but it's
it's
also
layers.
interesting. And I think why I like to know more about it is and the difference is just because obviously I love going deep and understanding and the esoteric around it. But I think just even it kind of gave me a like I could breathe out loud just saying like, I don't know. I think Channy was talking about if this is by, your 17 degree. I'm
Oh,
like, what?
yeah.
There's degrees now?
That's super, super
I was
deep, right? It goes deep. There are layers. And that's why, like,
yeah.
going back to the cycles of the moon, right? Everything comes back around. You may not care at all. Maybe your curiosity is not peaked at all to go deep right now. And
Yeah.
maybe it does when it does, right? Like timing is all, divine timing. When you're ready to hear the message, you will hear it. When you're ready to listen in, you will hear the message. So just thinking about it in that way, because the degrees, I mean, that's just a whole other layer, right? And it could be, in a snapshot, if Virgo is, I don't know what the exact degree that this lunar eclipse in Virgo is happening at, but in theory, you would say, then you would go to your chart and understand, does Virgo come anywhere close in my chart, the degree of where Virgo is in my chart with this, or are there any planets that are close to that degree of where the lunar eclipse is happening in Virgo? And what do
Mhm.
those planets symbolize? So that's like yet another layer. So, you know, do what you feel
Yeah.
resonates, what is drawing your interest, and like leave the rest because it
Yeah.
can turn you off from wanting to just know. And the point of all these systems or understanding them is to empower yourself to make the most aligned decisions for yourself. I went back to see because I couldn't remember where Virgo lands for me. It's my eighth house of other people's resources, collaborations, grief, death, and mental health. So, needless to say, on the Virgo, on the lunar eclipse in Virgo, probably a lot of grounding and just that's it for me. Like grounding
Yeah.
practices, just like I always think about eclipse season and I'm like, okay, what do I want to do? I want to get a little bit more rest. I don't want to push myself unless I absolutely have to do the things, but I just want to let what comes through come through.
Yeah, thanks for bringing in the astrology with it. I know that this episode was meant to be focused on the moon, but I couldn't escape that conversation because the moon to me and astrology seems so connected and understanding
For sure.
there. So I have a clear mindset on that. And the clearer mindset is stop letting one little detail steer you away. I mean, I think even when I heard that 17 degrees, I just went off on a whole different, like,
Right.
where is that? I'm like, this is not where you want to spend your energy today. Right.
Yeah. Well, and not
So,
everyone's meant to
yeah.
consume. I mean, talk about the amount of consumption that we take of everything
Yeah.
we're always taking in. And sometimes, like, I can go really deep on certain things and then be like, what did I just learn? I forgot it all already. Like, because my brain just wasn't ready for all of it.
Yeah. Time for our self-love check-in. Was there anything else we wanted to talk about when it comes to lunar eclipse?
No, I think that's everything. So, you want to go first?
All right, our self-love check-in today sounds like how can I honor my own natural cycles of energy, rest, and renewal just like the moon does? So, I have been very three lining it in regards to my schedule. I know I love a good routine. I thrive on a good
Mm.
routine. And now that I have a lot of my practices, they're really habits and they're in place. I've been really interested about working with, and I think the emotional wave really had me start on this. And then you and I talking about the cycles and especially right before we bleed. And, I was like, no, I do the same exercises every week, doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And where I've started to experiment is changing up. I mean, I can tell when I'm super fatigued. I just always push myself through it. And so I now started with my exercises like, okay, could you do a half an hour low impact ride? And not that that's not tough, but as opposed to a Tabata ride, which is, you know, high intensity, really
I never even
gasses you
heard that word
out.
before.
Yeah, but you want to now,
Tabata.
Tabata. It's just the timing where it'll be like you push. I think the difference between Tabata and intervals is they're very evened out, maybe. It's just like real quick.
Hmm.
Like it'll be like 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off, 20
Ah,
seconds
okay.
on, 20 seconds off. So, but like really, really pushing in. It's quick. So, I've really just been, much to my productivity addiction chagrin, been really looking at my energy and resting and three lining it right now. And starting to really assess how my body's reacting to that and, all of that good stuff. So I have been allowing myself to sleep in a little bit more
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and not telling myself as many stories about it. That's been one thing I've really been doing. And yeah, it's almost as if you're not doing those things, the universe will just force you to do it because I tweaked my back a month or
Yep.
so ago and and we had heard a lot of stories around that time too of people who just, whether they were sick, just really areas of people having to slow down and
Yeah.
pause. And so that tweaked back has also really helped me get back into just what does rest and relaxation look like, and rest is productive. And yeah, I guess I'll just throw it over to you before I just keep pontificating the
Mm.
same sentiment over and over. But think about, what comes up for you. How can you honor your own natural cycles of energy, rest, renewal, just as the moon does? What comes up for you?
Oh, well, I think that I've said this a couple times in recent episodes that this year and this season in particular has really been centered around refinement. And with that, for me, comes a lot of embodiment practices. And I really mean that in, I don't know, I think when I say refinement, I mean like just like going deeper or going to another level of what my practices look like or what I'm doing or how I live my life. And so, for example, I had mentioned to you before we hit record that I'm taking these Qigong classes at my local library. And I had done Qigong in the past a few years ago, and I really love this beautiful practice. But I hadn't revisited it here and there, like taking little bits and pieces of it. But when taking a whole class, what I've noticed, anyways, is just one, the fluidity of the movements in Tai Chi and in Qigong. And there's something so beautiful about that. And I was noticing for myself, like, there are still subtleties where I feel this disconnect. And it's maybe not necessarily, I don't know if disconnect is the right word, and maybe it is, but when I think about embodiment and refining my connection to my body and to movement in particular, I've just been ruminating on this a lot lately of like, um, I don't know if I'm linking the fluidity of my own movements in Qigong with like wanting to be more embodied. I don't know if any of that makes
Mhm.
sense, but I just think like really, really letting myself like release like I'm taking these classes in person and oftentimes I do work out at home. Or no, I don't work out often, but I do my workouts like whatever movement practices, they're done at home in the privacy of my living room or whatever, right? So when you're
Mhm.
in these collective spaces, you're so much more aware of your body and self-conscious of how you look. And so there's an element of that that ties in. And I don't know if it's like honoring my own natural cycles, but this is just where my brain went of like
Yeah.
tuning into that aspect. And I think, yeah, I don't even know if that really answers it, but that's where I'm at right now. That's what I like. I really am. I mean, if I want to talk literally, I manually track my cycle. I don't
Mhm.
use the apps. I manually track it. And it's one of my favorite things to do is to just know and keep knowing my body. But it is on a practical side because I am trying to now with this cycle really starting to get serious about tracking my ovulation and getting more in tune because I want to prepare myself to potentially maybe get pregnant this year. I don't know what is in store for me, and I'm really um, strangely just very open. I don't know. I mean, maybe because for whatever reason, this is just who I am. And so I say all that because the embodiment, the body movement, becoming more in tune with the subtleties and also the external layer of being, like aware of my body, what I'm doing, and just paying more attention to things like that that maybe I didn't in the past. So it's all coming up right now because it's
Mhm.
just all really present. It's all so I'm in that space. I don't even think I answered the question, but I did in my own way.
And
And
here
that's fine.
and here we are. And
It's not a
here we
test.
are. It's not a test, no gold stars, as my havening therapist likes to tell me, no gold stars. And yeah, I mean, I joke with you all the time. I was 41 years old when I started like really, really noticing my cycle
Yeah.
and the nuances of it, which seems a
Hmm.
little bananas, but here's where we're at. And I just think that for me, if I have anything to say about it, I won't let little women in my life who I love be as disconnected from their
Hmm.
cycle as they experience it and grow up. And there's no shame, blame around that at all. But
Yeah.
uh, just even things I know I've shared with you about I get crazy anxious before I bleed. And
Mm.
just even knowing that, it really, I just even knowing that and tracking that
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
helps. And so getting more sleep during that time is really helpful. And again, not doing maybe the high intensity, even though I like a good
Yeah.
energy movement, but it's where else can I do that
Yeah,
to
there's
release
so
some
much in that
energy?
right there. I was like, oh, my brain is firing off, like anxious about, and I'm not saying this is you, I'm just saying
Yeah.
the thing that's in my mind is right. Like, is it anxious a little bit about the fact that you know that your body is calling for rest and to slow down, but your brain is like, no, 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 we want to do this and be
Mhm.
productive, right? So it's like anxious about like, again, don't let me,
Who
but that's what
knows?
comes up, right? Is like, and
Yeah.
there's it's really fascinating. So, anyways,
But I guess what I would
yes.
share with that is that I think when we think about the cycles, is being aware of it.
Hmm.
And I think I was telling you the last couple of months, I feel it. I don't feel it as paralyzing as I used
Yes,
to. And that's been really helpful.
that's the
And
journey.
yeah, so when you were kind of talking about it, that's what came up as well, is just how we're resting and tracking and seeing what works for us.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a journey. It's such a process, right? It's like I have a coaching client that's like, how can I eliminate? I want to get rid of this feeling. And I'm like, and it doesn't happen in one cycle. It's not going to
Mhm.
happen in one session. You might lessen it, or you may expand your capacity to feel
Yeah.
this thing, or move away from those paralyzing feelings. But it's like just like the moon cycles, just like our inner cycles. It's like we're going to chip away at it in our own timing of when we're meant to release and move forward from these things in our lives that we, that we're letting go of, or whatever it is, or moving towards. And we do it in the timing that is totally right for us. And no one can, like your newsletter, what was it? That I commented on your most recent Substack. It was like, my truth is not up for debate. And I was like, yes, say it louder for the people in the back. Like, your
Yeah.
truth is not up for debate. It's whatever is coming up for you in that moment. That's what you're meant to be dealing with in that moment in time. And let the rest go, because we are cyclical beings. If it's meant to come back around, it's going to come back around. You don't have to worry about it. It's such a beautiful thing. So, anyways, to close out our episode,
Well, preach. I love that
yes,
preach on our way out.
yes. But, just driving home the point that the moon cycles really do mirror our own life cycles, no matter who you are. And there are always times to plant seeds. There are times for growing. There are times for release and for resting. And it is all right. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, we'd love if you share it with someone, if you leave a review, a rating, subscribe, follow, whatever it is. We really appreciate your support.
Until next time. Thanks for tuning in. If you resonate with today's conversation, connect with us on Instagram at Karmic Mirror Podcast and send us a message.
And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen. And if you're loving Karmic Mirror, we'd appreciate a glowing review or share with someone who could benefit.
As we close, remember, life is not a one-size-fits-all approach. How are you honoring your unique path? Stay curious and always be kind to yourself. Until next time on Karmic Mirror.